So this morning we're going to be starting our contemplation on the yoke of Jesus, and our primary scripture is Matthew 11:28-30, which reads, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." Now there are two secondary scriptures that I want to interact with this morning. One is Isaiah 9:4 and then 6-7. The other is Isaiah 10:27. "For you have shattered their yoke of forced labor, and the collar that lays heavy on their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice from that time forward and even forever." Then Isaiah 10:27, "It shall come to pass in that day that his burden will be taken away from your shoulder, and his yoke from your neck, and the yoke will be destroyed in the presence of the Anointed One." So we're going to take a look at three of these verses to begin with: 11:28, 9:4, and 10:27. And I want us to see that at this point, as we think about yoke, it's something different than how we have looked at it before. That doesn't mean that this is the right way and the other is the wrong way. Once again, this is a matter of layers, all right? So, yoke as it is used in these verses and for our purposes this morning speaks of the authority and power of government. The authority and power of government.
Governing or government?
It's the same. So it further describes the people's submission and servitude to that government. It further describes the submission and servitude of the people to that government. So, what's taking place on the surface of our passages from Isaiah is that the yoke, the government of Assyria, is oppressive, enslaving for the people of Israel. Okay? That's the context there. Now, let's come to this question. What characterizes Israel's yoke under Assyrian rule? We'll start there. Look at those scriptures, and what is characterized there?
Forced labor.
Forced labor. And that's the same word that we would translate burden. So part of the burden is that they are engaged in servitude, forced labor. The serving is forced upon them. It's not a choice. The subjection is forced upon them. It's not a choice. What else characterizes it?
Calls Assyria the oppressor, so oppression.
Yes, the oppression, and that comes into play when you see oppressor, and also when you look at the rod. The rod there is a word that's used in several different ways. So it can mean the stick that you would use to beat oxen who are in the yoke, to make them move, to make them do what you want them to do, to force them into the plowing labor or to carry the burden. It's also the word that speaks of the ruler's scepter, so that the power of the ruler is forcing you to do what the ruler wants. Okay. So in that thought, the idea is, once again, you're not driven to do the things because you want to do them so much, but you're driven to do the things because of the pain that comes to you if you don't. You'll get beaten with the stick. There's a pain involved here. And you are afraid of the pain that is to come. So you may have learned that if I don't do what they say, when they say it rather, that they're going to beat me with the rod. And so to avoid the pain, the fear of the pain, I'll go ahead and do what they say. So fear and pain are involved in the oppressing, in the rule of the enemy here. Does that make sense? So what else do you see that characterizes this?
Israel is treated like an enemy.
Yes, yes. An enemy that has been defeated and therefore is a slave. Yeah.
They're just truly subdued, into basically into slavery, and they have an obligation to Assyria to repay essentially all of the trouble that they've caused Assyria.
Yeah. Well, and it's not so much that you're right. It's not so much they've caused Assyria trouble. It's that Assyria is land grabbing.
Right. Well, they were in the way.
That's that's right.
It's
Dehumanizing.
Thank you.
Yes. Not dehumidify. No. But dehumanizing, yes.
Along that idea of dehumanizing is their property. They become
Yes.
property. There's an issue of ownership
Yes.
and dominion here.
Yes.
Now, we would say that's wrong, right? That's wrong. We understand owning other people and using them as slaves is wrong. But this would have been very normal in the context of the day of a conquered people.
Yes. And this is something that we'll move into more next week, so I won't say a lot about that now. But in being owned, they've also lost an identity in that. Yes. Notice too, it says that the collar, this is the collar of the yoke, is heavy on their shoulders. And so the labor that's involved here, that's enforced upon them, it's not labor that they end up benefiting from. This is labor for someone else. And it is the kind of labor that, you can work hard at a job and feel good about it afterwards because now you've got the result of your hard work. No. Your hard work is for someone else. It's actually meant to crush you. It's meant to destroy you. It's meant to be simply toil. It's part of what breaks down your resistance to the rule. So all of those matters are included in this idea of the yoke being an act of governing that brings about the submission and servitude of those being governed. Any others? Yeah.
It sounds a lot like when they were in Egypt and
Mhm.
Moses was causing trouble, And so then they were like, okay, we're going to increase your bricks and we're not going to give you materials for it, and just to press on them
Yes.
to stop their resisting.
Exactly. If I'm not mistaken, I think the word yoke is even used in that context. But I could be mistaken, right? All right, what connections then do you see between Matthew 11:28, as it is in the darkened print there, Isaiah 9:4, and 10:27?
The yoke is broken or lifted, removed.
How do you see that in Matthew 11:28? You're right, it will be.
Yeah. He's talking about those who have it.
Yes.
Who are under it.
Yes.
Well, and he's really confirming what is, I guess, really he said in Isaiah too. You know, if you really kind of break it down, he's just simply confirming what was already said. It will come to pass in the day, and he's Matthew 28 when he says it. It's fulfilling exactly, and those who would have known Scripture even then would have known exactly what that means.
Sure. They would have made the connection.
Would it speak about transferring one type of yoke to another?
It would, but we're not quite there yet. When you look at what is the darkened print of Matthew 11:28, it simply reads, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden." So if you notice, it's the forced labor, Isaiah 9:4, and the heavy on their shoulders. And so when Jesus says this, we should have done something we didn't. We'll come to it after I say this sentence. When Jesus says this, he's referring to what?
The yoke of forced labor, the
That's-
collar that lays heavy on the shoulders.
Yeah.
Who-
Oppressed.
Who are oppressed. And so here's what we should have answered and did, and it's my fault. Because there was another question up there. What deeper reality is pictured by this situation?
It's our own personal today, how it applies to us today, our own personal oppression, and it's personal.
It is. What government is doing that to you?
Powers of darkness.
Yes, this is speaking about Satan's rule. And that under his rule, there is this oppressive yoke that is placed on us. And so when Jesus says to the people who are around them, one of the interesting things is, of course, he's speaking to Jews. And he's saying, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden." What is that saying to them about their own plight at that point? They're under Satan's rule, even though they're God's chosen people. At that time, they are under the enemy's rule.
From spiritually or from the government literal perspective, that Satan is operating in the Assyrians in order to oppress them.
Yes, it's both.
They're emboldened by Satan in order to oppress them.
Yep, it's both. All of what we're seeing from this then is that those oppressive regimes, Assyria, Persia, Greece, Rome, Israel, underneath these powers is simply stating that the real darkness in the world is not yet dealt with. That humanity labors, is involved in enslaving labor. Humanity is owned in a way. Humanity is being oppressed. We carry heavy yokes and burdens that don't end up developing who we are or fulfilling what we long for. They end up grinding us down. Do you see how all of that fits in together? And certainly, Israel would never have looked around and said, well, we are under the... No, they wouldn't have said that. They knew they were under the foreign power of Rome, but they would certainly never have identified themselves as under Satan's power. And yet, what is it that Jesus says to them? you do the works of your father. Because he was a liar from the beginning, a murderer from the beginning. And we must recognize that there is this whole dimension to the world that we oftentimes are not dealing with, that is the real dimension that we're living with. We oftentimes are under the yoke. Okay. Any other comments that you want to make on that, or any questions in relation to that? Do you see how these things are being tied together? Yeah? Okay.
It's helpful because a lot of times I forget. Sometimes I just feel like loaded down, and I forget that that's what I'm dealing with.
Yes. And it's helpful to call out what the reality is. Yeah.
Okay.
So now I've got Matthew 28 to 30 highlighted. Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. You already hear what Jesus is saying in a whole different light, don't you? If you're recognizing that the yoke is this burden, oppressive government, right? Now, when Jesus says what he says about take my yoke upon you, you hear this, wait, he's saying something different than I thought. Right? There's more going on here than I originally thought. So what is Jesus's answer to those who are under the burden and labor of Satan's yoke?
Come to me.
Yes, this is what Kara was pointing to earlier. Take my yoke upon you. Which means come underneath my rule. The answer to Satan's rule is not your independence. The answer to Satan's rule is God's rule in your life. Do you hear the difference?
Why not just say there is no yoke at all? If yoke is to be a kind of associated with oppression, or not oppression, but something that has to be, clipped on as used here, I always wondered why not use yoke is required. Simply
Because
come
you
to
still have to
me.
be guided.
Yeah, you have to be under somebody's rule.
Whoops.
Satan's rule or God's rule.
Okay.
That's how I look at it.
I'm just saying, from an outsider's perspective, looking at that, I could see a confusion there. It's like, well,
To say that a yoke can represent oppressive rule is not to exhaust the kind of rule that can be a yoke, right?
That's a good one. Yeah.
And in order to get to the light, we must enter the darkness.
We're already there.
Right.
Right?
But the question I was going to ask here is, like, you always think, well, your burden is light. So we're thinking in terms of like pounds, or metaphoric weight. But I don't know that I've ever thought about it in terms of, well, my burden is light. Like, in other words, the light of God's goodness means it's the light of the darkness, is we're reconciled. Like, we should be burdened with that in the midst of the burden, right? It's just our framework and interpretation of what the burden is about and for.
It's this interesting, see, in our language we can make that word play, but in the Greek you can't.
Okay.
But it's a good point nonetheless. It's a point that should be made. So I've raised that as something to be aware of. This is the very kind of reading in English that we ought to be doing, because that is a lesson that the Spirit could teach us as we read these words in English. And the words in English are scripture too, aren't they? They're where we meet God. So this is one of those lessons that I like to highlight for us when they happen. And what is those called? A learning moment, right? Yeah. Because it is the way in which the Spirit is saying, look, there's something else going on. And it's not about what is the one right way to interpret a passage. Okay, so that's important. So good work on that. I think that one of the things we'll see is there are different kinds of weight. There is the weight of glory, but that's different than the weight of oppression. One weight crushes us. The other weight makes us substantial. Right? There's something else going on in that. But we'll get there. We'll get there. Very good to bring up that wordplay, though. Very good. So yes, again, Jesus says, if you want to get out from under the oppression, the heaviness, and all that goes with it, you come under my rule. That's the freedom. There is no man's land in which you're just on your own. That doesn't exist in reality. It's important to know. Because a lot of times we will say something like, well, I surely don't want to be with Satan, but I'm not sure really want to be with God either. If you're not for me, you're against me. If you're not against me, you're for me. There is this choice that has to be made at some point. Now, let's take a look at what characterizes Jesus' yoke. And I've lifted up Isaiah 9, 6, and 7. But we could also include 10:27 in this, because what we see, it is the child that is born in Isaiah 9:4 that sets free. Why? Because the government is upon his shoulders. There's a government that overcomes the government of oppression and the evil yoke. And we see in 10:27, it shall come to pass in that day that his burden, Israel's burden, will be taken away. So notice, in order to come out from under the yoke of Satan, there has to be a stronger power that breaks you free from that yoke. But I want you to notice also the way in which Isaiah 9, 6, and 7 is talking about this. He says, for unto us a child is born. Yep, we know that. This should be 4. Unto us a son is given, and the government, notice this, will be upon his shoulder. What do you make of that? What were we just talking about on shoulders?
I mean, the yoke of the government will be on Jesus' shoulders.
Yeah, right.
Broad shoulders.
There's something very interesting taking place. We're only going to look at one of the ways in which to take this today. We'll look at another way next week. Say again?
Does it matter that it's just one shoulder? Is it singular? Does that...
Shoulder can carry any number of things.
Well, think about it this way. In the government of the kingdom of God, the king is in the yoke with you, because he bears the yoke. The government will be upon his shoulder. In the kingdom of God, the king is in the yoke with you, with the people. He is not a power over you to subjugate you, but a power with you that you might share in his life. It's a different kind of rule altogether. Yes, Sam?
Like, is this what you were talking about earlier to me? About when they would put 2 oxen together, one that had experience, the other that didn't? So we'd be obviously the ones that didn't have the experience, and Jesus would be the one that did have experience.
Yes.
Well, it'd be like a 3-way, so it'd be us, yoke, 3, and then Jesus here, and then government, and everything else on the other side. Nope.
And we'll get into that in just a minute. Yeah, he is the government.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then it's just 2 then. Okay.
Him and us.
Yeah. So it becomes part of his purview. Part of his.
Yeah, because who is it that defeated Satan? Who is it that defeated sin? Who overruled them? Jesus. Who is the king that is welcomed into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday?
Jesus.
Your king comes to you lowly and riding. Yeah. So it's Jesus. He is the king. But this king doesn't lord it over you. This king comes in the yoke with you. It's a shared rule, which kind of reflects back, doesn't it, to Genesis 1:26 through 28? When Jesus, who is God and humanity, right? When Jesus overcomes, the shared rule of God overcomes. This is why in Matthew 28:18, all authority, Jesus says, in heaven and earth has been given to me. Who? The one who is the yoke, the one who ties together God and humanity. Okay, we'll speak more about that later.
Which verse in Genesis?
1:26 to 28. And the reason for today that I want us to think about this in this way, that Jesus, the King, enters the yoke with us, is because his yoke is his life of love with the Father in the Spirit. His yoke is the life of love with the Father in the Spirit. So when you think about service and submission as part of the yoke, what is different about the submission and service of Jesus' yoke?
The freedom.
And shared life, share on the journey, share under his rule with his rule.
Yes, both of those things.
To original design as planned. Restoration to just what was originally designed and planned by God, which was to have that community.
So why does Jesus say, if you do what I say, later in John 15, he's just talked about abide in my words, and you abide in my love. And then he goes on to say, if you do what I tell you, if you do my commandments, if you keep my commandments, I don't think of you as a servant. I think of you are my loved one. Because our service is an act of love. It's not imposed on us from outside. It is the service of love. Our submission is not imposed upon us. It is the serving, the submission to your needs, to what brings you joy and goodness and well-being and beauty. I submit myself to that because I love you. This is why the King gets in the yoke with us. Because the King is also the one who serves us. Because the yoke is the life of love between him and the Father in the Spirit. And if that's the yoke, if that's what's governing, then love is the one that is governing my submission and my service. And so my submission and my service are simply the act of love. I don't continue to do what I do because I'm afraid of the pain of what happens if I don't. I don't do what I do because I'm afraid of getting beaten. I do what I do because love pushes me. That's what's governing me. That's the yoke that sets you free from the yoke of bondage and oppression. Do you see the difference there? Any other thoughts on that in particular?
It frames it as an invitation, because it says, come to me.
Right.
He's inviting you to be a part of that.
Exactly right.
It's the embodiment of relationship.
Exactly right.
The other is in fully integrated.
Exactly. Exactly right, Jeff. So let's take a look at some of the other characteristics of Jesus' yoke. He says there, take my yoke upon you, learn from me, I'm gentle and lowly in heart, you'll find rest for your souls. Why? Because my yoke is easy, my burden is light. So what we're going to do is start with the easy and the burden is light, because that's what causes the other stuff. So you'll probably remember that the word easy here doesn't mean requires no effort. And easy doesn't mean simple. Easy is a word that has the idea of well-fitting or suited to. Which is to say then that Jesus' yoke is suited to humanity. It's suited to being a human. Why? Well, because Jesus is the true human, and he is the one who has created our humanity. And in living his human life in communion with the love of the Father and the Spirit, he's created a humanity that's what is suited to us. That's how humanity works. That's how we avoid. That's why we would never be under the domination of the enemy if we're under the domination of love. Yes.
Right. Which implies that in a world of good, knowing good and evil, and obviously under fallen state, then we have to guide it. I mean, that's why the yoke is even used in this metaphor, I would imagine, is because throughout this life, whether it's a literal oppression from an actual government for people overseas somewhere who are, being persecuted, or even just in our personal lives kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it implies we must be guided and it must be by love. I mean,
yes, it lets you know.
Saying like you got to do it or else, obviously.
Right. He doesn't, because that would be power over. The power we have with him is that we're in the yoke with him. That's our power. He shares his power with us. And that power is a power of love. Yes, Tom.
So one of the connections based on your question I'm making versus just a lot of our history of teaching in the past is, well, what fulfills our longing? And so an aspect of this, since we're talking a lot about work today, right? All of us have work to do, is I think a lot of us are raised with a belief that work in and of itself is a result of the fall. And that's a lie. Because there's a nature to work that should be ontologically compatible with our humanity, that is good and is beautiful. It's still work, but it fulfills our longing, and it's what we were intended for. And and we can have that on this side of eternity, and that is good. But the enemy deceives and clouds our perception to participate in that.
Yeah. And it's the difference in how we perceive what our work is. Exactly. Exactly right. Exactly right. Yes. So the yoke of Jesus is suited to our humanity. As I've mentioned before, if you think about driving a nail into a very dense piece of wood and you're just going to use your hand to do it, boom, 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 that's going to hurt. And you're not going to make a lot of progress with that. If you use a hammer, you're still going to have to work kind of hard to beat it in, but it's a lot easier to use the hammer than it is to use your fist. Why? Because a hammer is suited to driving a nail. The yoke of Jesus is suited to living out your human life. And the reason that we experience so much pain and toil and so forth is that we are living under a yoke that is not suited to our humanity. So trying to be the best at stuff so that you have value, you're trying to be human in a way that doesn't work. Trying to get everybody to respect you, and you doing whatever you do to get their respect, or trashing them when they don't. It's a way of being human that doesn't work. You're not suited to that. It's not how your humanity is built. It's not what your humanity is built for. It's meant for the life of love that Jesus has with the Father in the Spirit. And neither of those things that we just talked about are ways of living that out. So knowing what the yoke is, that it is suited to you as a human, really matters. And what I'm going to suggest is that when you get home, it doesn't have to be today, but when you get home, go through all of the different characteristics of what exemplified Jesus' yoke, and then see how that isn't there in the yoke of Satan. Okay? So, it's well-fitting and suited to. The burden is light. It's not light because there isn't work to be done, and it's not light because the work to be done is so easy either. Jesus goes to the cross, but it is light because it is love. It is what you do in love. And love lightens the load that you carry. And it's because God himself is in the yoke with you. The one who is love is in the yoke with you. And there is this power in love, this perseverance in love, that makes a burden light, even if it's difficult. Burdens that would crush us build us if we do them in love. And they don't only build us, they build the people around us. What makes our suffering and our burdens and our oppression so heavy is that we lose touch with love oftentimes in the midst of them. And this is why Paul can say that you cannot compare the weight of suffering with the weight of glory, because one is so substantial it is eternal, that's glory, and one is so fleeting it won't be here tomorrow, that's suffering. So there is a way in which we do things that require a great deal of effort, that are some very heavy things, but doing them in the love of God gives them a lightness to it that is at the same time a weight, a true weight. And again, we'll say more about this in another message. Does that make sense to you? Does that fit?
I've seen it in my own life, suffering, like what you mentioned before, suffering with Christ versus, on our own.
Yes.
Our own devices, like a world light years apart from each other.
Yes.
As far as yoke, weight, if you want to call it that.
Yes. Absolutely right.
And I think of our closing thing that we say,
yeah.
the path we walk, Christ walks in.
Yes.
And that's him sharing the yoke with us.
It is.
Whatever it may be.
Absolutely, Kara. Exactly right. Yep. Yeah. So, because the yoke is well-fitting and suited to us, because the burden of his yoke, his government, is light, and we'll get into more of why it's light in just a moment, we learn. He says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. So this is really important as well. You can't simply learn about Jesus by reading a book. You can't learn about the government of Jesus by hearing it from someone else. You learn Jesus by getting into the yoke with him. This is when you learn. And what you are learning is, what does it mean to be human? You're learning that from the true human. You are learning that from the human who is in the communion of love with the Father in the Spirit. And so you learn from Jesus what it means to be human, and you learn progressively how to live as who you are. Because we don't all the time know that. We are so alienated from our own humanity that we think being really successful is what makes our life good. And that's what we long for, is to be really successful. And we're so disappointed when we're not. And we're so despondent about ourselves and our worth and value when we're not. And that's because we're just alienated from our own longing. We haven't learned. We're not present to who we actually are. You learn that when you are in the yoke with Jesus. And as you progressively present yourself to Jesus, as you learn this, you learn to become progressively true to your own identity and true to your own longings, and you are integrated. The who that you are is integrated with the how that you live. That only happens when you're in the yoke. It doesn't happen by knowing there are distinctions and even being able to explain them. You only know them in your life when you're in the yoke with Jesus, when you're under his rule. Because what is the significance of rule again? Just as a basic concept.
Under dominion of God.
Make look like.
To make look like. A rule makes you look like your ruler. So remember that the word in the Old Testament for rule means parable. This is like that. So that what you rule over ends up looking like you. That's the point of being ruled. So why would you want to be ruled by the Father? So that you look like him. So that he can shape you in his image. That's what Jesus gave himself to. Shape me in your love. That's when he's ruling over you. We're so tied into ruling is dominating me and I just can't stand it. No, ruling is being shaped by what rules you. And this is the danger of being in the yoke of the enemy. It's shaping you. You're learning something from it. And what you're learning is a deception about what it means to be you. Gotta be faster, faster, faster. So, gentle, not weak, gentle. Those are two different things. As a matter of fact, you can't be gentle if you are weak. Because you only tell somebody who has the power to harm, you need to be gentle. Even if it's a child. If you have young children, a newborn and a 3-year-old, and the 3-year-old is wanting to hold the baby, you say to the 3-year-old, be gentle. Why? Because they're just as strong as a grown person? Of course not. But because they do have the power to hurt. There's power that they have to restrain or use rightly. So gentleness is about rightly used power. And in Jesus, his gentleness is that his power is always the expression of his love. You get that? His power is always the expression of his love. And so he's gentle. He's a gentle ruler. He's got all the power in the universe. His power, as Hebrews 1:3 says, that God upholds all things by the word of his power, the Son's power. So everything is held in being by the power of the Son. But it is a power that is the expression of love. So again, this is his power to be with you so that you may be who you are in God's love. Not a power over, but a power with. He's lowly in heart. His love does not desire to dominate you, but to bring you joy. bring you beauty, to bring you well-being. Again, to develop who you are in his love. He's lowly in heart precisely because he does love you. And so he puts you first, not himself. And then it brings rest. Notice the peace in Isaiah 9, 6 and 7. There's peace that his government brings. And it's the rest that your soul is searching for, because it is actually the fulfillment of what your heart longs for. It's not a life spent in constant search and acquisition and getting this and making sure I have that and protecting this and attacking those who would threaten what I have. It's a life that can rest because in the yoke you have what you need. Jump down to the last question. How does the image of being yoked to Jesus help you to apply or participate in his rule in your life?
I think a real easy one I would apply to my own life is recognizing that we all have areas in our life where we are ruling. It could be as a parent, in our workplace, in our community, whatever the context is, where we're exercising rule over some domain, okay? And you ask yourself, is the way in which I am ruling imaging the way God would rule here, in love, to bring harmony or peace or goodness or wholeness to a situation?
Yes.
Or am I grabbing the levers of coercion or force or control or violence or whatever to achieve, quote unquote, my ends?
Yes.
And that it becomes a really good litmus test to sort of test your heart by the little way in which you're going about ruling.
And what encourages me is it's all based on relationship. In this case, it's a loving relationship with our Father, our Creator, Jesus.
Good.
The other is not really based on a relationship, but one that leads to the opposite.
Yes. Yeah. Very much so.
I feel like once you know that you can be yoked and have seen it played out, it's the only way to live, really. It's like, oh, I can get through life now. Do pretty much anything now that I know I have Jesus. Like, even if I turn away at times, like, it's still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, the offer of invitation's always there.
Yeah.
Time and time again, I'll stray away and realize, nope. Yeah, but I could do it. No, never mind. That sounds like a Brian plan.
Yeah. I think it can help too with something along the lines of what Kara was expressing earlier. There's no situation that we enter into that we can't enter into it yoked with Jesus. So it's not us doing something on Jesus's behalf and he's over there and now I'm going out in my power to get it done. But I'm plowing this that I'm doing with Jesus. I'm bringing his rule, not as though he's over there, but I am bearing his rule with him into this situation. And if we think about that in those terms, it can alter the way that we both experience what's going on and respond to it. Because whatever happens is not just happening to me. It's happening to me in the yoke with Jesus. And Jesus just ain't scared of what's going on. And he doesn't feel overwhelmed by it.
And that's how we learn.
Yes.
How we're shaped
Yes.
to look like him.
Exactly.
It's one step at a time.
Yes.
It's a power.
Accustoming. Yes.
It is accustoming. Exactly.
And if there's a video game called Fallout, you have to wear power armor. That's like that. I mean, power armor, if you go without power armor, good luck.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm asking you all to consider when you go home. Think about the different characteristics of Jesus's yoke. They're opposite, pretty much, is going to be what's taking place in the yoke of the prince of this world. Right? Well, in just a few moments, we're going to celebrate that we are in the yoke with Jesus, that he is our life. Reflect on sharing that yoke with him, and then come and take from the bread and the cup.